He mocked his wife for not having a lawyer, but when her mother walked into the room, everything changed. Rebecca Harrison felt her heart racing as she looked at the man with whom she had shared 15 years of marriage. The divorce proceedings had become a cruel battle, where she seemed to be fighting empty-handed against a well-armed opponent. "You couldn't even get a decent lawyer," shouted Derek Thompson, her husband, pointing his finger at her in the middle of the crowded courtroom. His laughter echoed through the room, causing several people in the audience to turn and observe the embarrassing scene. Dressed in a simple black dress, Rebecca lowered her head, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes upon her. Derek's words hit her like sharp blades. All those years she had been the dedicated wife who gave up her dreams of being a teacher to take care of the home and support his business. Now he wanted to get rid of her to be with Ashley, an employee in her early 20s, and he was determined to leave her with absolutely nothing. Derek's lawyer, an arrogant man named Attorney Gerald Foster, adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and smiled with satisfaction. He knew he had an easy victory in his hands. After all, what chance would a middle-aged housewife have against a carefully planned legal strategy? "Your Honor," said Attorney Foster, addressing the judge, "my client signed clear documents waiving any rights to the couple's assets. As you can see in these papers, she was aware that she did not contribute financially to building the estate." Rebecca felt her world collapsing. She vaguely remembered signing some papers over the years, but Derek always said it was just business bureaucracy and that she didn't need to worry about the details. She trusted him blindly, as a loving wife does. "Furthermore," continued Derek, standing up and walking around the room as if he owned the place, "everyone here knows she never worked a single day in her life. She spent her days spending my money on beauty salons and expensive clothes. It would be a waste to give half of my assets to someone who only knew how to spend." The words were lies and cruel. Rebecca had worked, but always at home, managing the household, organizing events for Derek's clients, being the perfect hostess who helped build his reputation in the business world. But how could she prove that now? One of Derek's employees, Dorothy Parker, was called as a witness. The 50-year-old woman avoided looking directly at Rebecca as she brazenly lied about the boss's wife's supposed excessive spending. "She was always buying unnecessary things," lied Dorothy, clearly nervous. "Shoes, purses, always complaining that she didn't have enough. The boss was always worried about her spending." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Rebecca knew Dorothy was being forced to lie. For years, they had maintained a respectful relationship, and the employee had always praised her simplicity and generosity. But now, with her job at risk, she chose to save her own skin. The judge, Judge Robert Montgomery, an experienced man in his 60s, watched everything carefully. He had presided over hundreds of divorce cases and knew how to recognize when something wasn't right. But he needed concrete evidence. "Mrs. Thompson," said the judge, addressing Rebecca, "where is your legal representation? You have the right to a lawyer." Rebecca swallowed hard. She had sought out several law firms in the city of Richmond, her hometown in the Tidewater region, but they all asked for very high amounts as a retainer. Derek had frozen all of their joint bank accounts, claiming asset protection during the proceedings. She didn't even have money to pay for a private attorney. I couldn't find a lawyer who would work without an upfront payment," she whispered, feeling her cheeks burn with shame. The audience murmured among themselves. Some chuckled softly, others shook their heads in disapproval. Derek smiled victoriously, knowing his financial isolation strategy had worked perfectly. "Pathetic," Derek commented loudly enough for everyone to hear. 15 years married to me and she can't even pay for a lawyer. That shows exactly the kind of woman she is." Attorney Foster seized the moment of vulnerability to attack further. He presented bank statements that supposedly proved Rebecca's excessive spending, documents that would later be revealed as manipulated, but which at that moment seemed devastatingly convincing. "As you can see," said the attorney, spreading the papers on the table, "over a 12-month period she spent an absurd amount on frivolities, beauty salons, designer clothes, expensive dinners, all while my client worked 16 hours a day to support this lavish lifestyle." Rebecca felt herself growing smaller. Each word was like a hammer shattering her dignity into pieces. She looked at the people in the audience and saw only faces of judgment and disapproval. No one there knew her true story. No one knew of the sacrifices she had made. It was then that the double doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a bang that echoed throughout the room. The sound was so loud and unexpected that all conversation stopped instantly. Every head turned toward the sound. An elegant woman of approximately 65 was walking down the center aisle with firm, determined steps. She wore an impeccable yellow suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, and she carried a brown leather briefcase in her hands. Her blue eyes, identical to Rebecca's, conveyed a determination that made the air in the room grow heavier. It was Margaret Bennett, Rebecca's mother. Derek blinked several times, unable to believe what he was seeing. Margaret had been absent for almost 2 years, caring for her own sick mother in Charlotte, North Carolina. She and Rebecca had barely spoken since the beginning of the marriage, as Margaret had never approved of her daughter's union with Derek, considering him manipulative and self-serving. "My God," someone in the audience whispered. "Who is that woman?" Margaret walked with the upright posture of someone who always knew exactly where she was going. Each step echoed on the courtroom's marble floor, creating a rhythm that seemed to mark a definitive shift in the course of events. Her presence commanded instant respect. Rebecca's eyes widened, unable to believe her mother was there. They hadn't spoken in months, since an argument about the marriage where Margaret had said harsh words about Derek that Rebecca at the time considered unfair. Now, seeing her mother walking toward her, she felt a mix of relief and confusion. Derek, who seconds before was pure arrogance, now showed visible unease. He had known Margaret for a long time and knew she was not a person who showed up without a reason. During the first years of marriage, he had worked hard to distance Rebecca from her mother, planting seeds of discord between them. "What the hell is she doing here?" Derek murmured to his lawyer. Attorney Foster adjusted his glasses, also puzzled by the unexpected arrival. He had prepared to face a defenseless woman. He hadn't counted on the possibility of family interference. Margaret stopped right beside the chair where Rebecca was sitting. For a moment, mother and daughter looked at each other in silence. Mrs. Margaret's eyes were filled with a fierce determination, but there was also a silent plea for forgiveness for the lost time and the unspoken words. "If it pleases the court," said Margaret, addressing the judge with a clear, professional voice, "I request permission to represent my daughter in this proceeding." The courtroom fell completely silent. Attorney Foster stood up immediately, clearly bothered by the interruption. "Your Honor, with all due respect, but the lady cannot simply walk in here and—" Margaret interrupted him with an elegant wave of her hand and retrieved a leather wallet from her purse. When she opened it, she revealed an active and current attorney's license from the North Carolina State Bar. "Margaret Bennett, North Carolina State Bar number 4521, she said, handing the document to the court clerk. "Graduated from the University of North Carolina in 1983, specializing in family law and women's rights." The impact of the revelation was immediate. Derek visibly paled. Throughout all the years of marriage, he knew Margaret only as the mother-in-law who had never worked, a lady who lived taking care of the home and family. He never imagined she was a licensed attorney. Rebecca looked at her mother with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Margaret had stopped practicing law after Rebecca's birth, dedicating herself entirely to the family, but apparently she had kept her license active and continued studying in silence all these years. "Mum," whispered Rebecca, tears in her eyes. "Not now, dear," replied Margaret quietly, but with a comforting smile. "Let Mommy handle this." The judge examined the documentation and nodded, approving the representation. Attorney Foster sat back down, but his earlier comfort had completely vanished. He knew facing an experienced attorney would be very different from intimidating a defenseless housewife. Margaret opened her briefcase and took out a stack of documents organized with military precision. It was evident she had prepared thoroughly for that moment. "Your Honor," Margaret began, "I request a 15-minute recess to analyze the documents submitted by the opposing party. It is my right as the newly appointed attorney of record." The judge agreed, and during the recess, Margaret examined every paper with the meticulousness of a surgeon. Her eyebrows arched several times, and she made quick notes in a notepad. Rebecca watched her, fascinated, seeing a side of her mother she had never known. When the session resumed, Margaret stood up with an expression that mixed professional indignation and maternal fury. "Your Honor, after analyzing the submitted documents, I have identified several serious irregularities that need to be clarified," she announced. "First, I would like to question the authenticity of my client's signatures on at least 3 fundamental documents." Attorney Foster shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Derek, for his part, had completely lost the color in his face. "Second," continued Margaret, "the dates of these documents coincide exactly with periods when my daughter was admitted to St. Joseph's Hospital in Richmond, recovering from gallbladder surgery. I have here the complete medical records." She placed on the table a folder with hospital documents, medication receipts, and even photos of Rebecca in the hospital bed on the dates in question. The preparation was impressive. Derek tried to interject, but Margaret silenced him with a look that could freeze hell. "Third point, Your Honor," Margaret proceeded. "I have discovered that over the past 15 years my daughter was placed as a silent partner in at least 4 of the defendants' companies without her knowledge. She signed documents believing they were household contracts, when in fact she was assuming business liabilities." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Being a silent partner was an illegal practice that could lead to serious criminal consequences. Derek was not only trying to steal from his wife, but had also used her for tax evasion schemes. Attorney Foster tried to object, but Margaret was just getting started. "And finally," she said, pulling another set of documents from her briefcase, "I have here bank records showing that 40% of the couple's entire estate was legally built using my daughter's social security number. According to the law, this makes her the legitimate owner of that percentage, regardless of any forged waiver document." The bomb had dropped. Derek realized his carefully planned strategy had not only failed but had backfired. By using Rebecca as a front in his schemes, he had inadvertently made her the owner of almost half of everything he possessed. Margaret wasn't finished. During the 2 years she was away caring for her sick grandmother, she had discreetly hired a forensic accountant and a private investigator, driven by maternal instinct and a deep distrust of her son-in-law. What they discovered was far worse than she had imagined. "Your Honor," Margaret continued, "we also discovered bank accounts in tax havens in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, opened in the name of companies that list my daughter as the official partner. The defendant was using her identity to hide money from the Internal Revenue Service." With each revelation, Derek sank deeper into his chair. The man who had entered the courtroom laughing and making jokes about his defenseless wife was now sweating cold and avoiding any eye contact. The witnesses he had brought to testify began to be questioned one by one. Dorothy Parker was the first to break under the pressure of Margaret's cross-examination. "Ms. Parker," said Margaret in a firm but not aggressive voice, "are you being threatened with dismissal if you don't cooperate with your employer's testimony?" Dorothy looked nervously at Derek, then at Margaret, and finally gave in. "Yes, ma'am," she confessed with tears in her eyes. "He said if I didn't speak badly of the lady of the house, I'd lose my job. But the truth is that Mrs. Rebecca was always a good person, never spent too much, always careful with the family's money." One by one, the other employees followed Dorothy's example, revealing how they had been coerced into lying. Derek's castle of lies was crumbling brick by brick. Attorney Foster, realizing the situation was untenable, requested a recess to speak with his client. During the break, he whispered something in Derek's ear that left him visibly desperate. "You told me there was no risk," Derek murmured furiously. "You said it would be easy, that she had no way to defend herself." "How was I supposed to know the mother-in-law was a lawyer?" retorted Attorney Foster. "And worse, why didn't you tell me about the overseas accounts? This changes everything. You could face criminal charges." When the session resumed, Margaret had even more surprises prepared. She revealed that Rebecca had begun secretly recording conversations with Derek in the last months of the marriage, sensing something was wrong. "Your Honor," said Margaret, placing a small recorder on the table, I present the recordings my daughter made of her final conversations with the defendant, where he confesses his intentions to leave her with nothing and reveals details of the tax schemes. Derek's voice echoed through the courtroom, clear as crystal. You're a fool, Rebecca. You spent 15 years signing papers without reading them, trusting me like an idiot. When the divorce is final, you'll find out you're not entitled to anything. All the assets are protected in the companies, and you don't understand anything about business to contest it. The silence in the courtroom was tomb-like. Derek's own voice condemned him irrefutably. In another recording, he detailed to a friend how he had used his wife's name to open accounts abroad. The scheme is perfect, man. I use her social security number for everything, and she has no idea. Women just don't understand money anyway. If there's ever a problem, I'll pin all the blame on her and pretend I knew nothing. The judge's expression visibly hardened. He had seen many cases throughout his career, but Derek's calculated coldness was impressive, even by the court's standards. Derek tried one last desperate move. He stood up and pointed angrily at Margaret. "This is nothing but the revenge of a resentful mother-in-law," he shouted. "She never accepted me into the family, always tried to turn my wife against me. Now she wants revenge using lies and forged documents." Margaret smiled calmly. It was exactly the reaction she had expected. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "if I may present a few more pieces of evidence that establish the chronology of events." She spread across the table receipts, medical records, bank statements, and even photos documenting every mentioned event. Everything was dated, stamped, and verifiable. There was no way to dispute their authenticity. "As the court can verify," Margaret continued, "each document presented here is official and can be easily confirmed with the relevant authorities. There is no personal vendetta, only documented facts." The audience watched, fascinated by the display of legal preparation. Some whispered admiring comments about the attorney's competence. Rebecca looked at her mother with a mix of pride and gratitude she hadn't felt in a long time. During the final recess before the sentencing, mother and daughter spoke for the first time in months. "Why did you never tell me you were an attorney?" asked Rebecca. "Because you never asked, dear," replied Margaret with a sad smile. "When you were born, I chose to leave my career to be a full-time mother. But I never completely abandoned it. I kept studying, following changes in the law, keeping my license active. I always thought I might need to use it one day to protect my family." "And when did you find out about the divorce?" "Dorothy called me 3 months ago," Margaret confessed. "She was worried about you and told me Derek was planning something terrible. That's when I decided to investigate discreetly. What I discovered was worse than I imagined." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Rebecca held her mother's hand, feeling for the first time in years that she wasn't alone. "Forgive me for pulling away," she said with tears in her eyes. "You were right about him from the start." "No need to ask for forgiveness, my daughter," replied Margaret. "What matters is that we're together again now." When the judge returned to deliver the final sentence, the atmosphere in the courtroom was completely transformed. Derek, once arrogant and smug, was now downcast and defeated. Attorney Foster could barely disguise his professional embarrassment. "After reviewing all the evidence presented," began Judge Montgomery, "I am shocked by the level of manipulation and fraud documented in this case. I have rarely witnessed such a clear case of psychological and financial abuse." He paused, looking directly at Derek. "Mr. Thompson, in addition to the equal division of legitimate assets, you must pay substantial compensation to your ex-wife for the years of psychological manipulation and misuse of her identity for criminal purposes. The accounts abroad will be immediately frozen, and you will face a full investigation by the Internal Revenue Service." The sentence continued, detailing every aspect of the asset division. Rebecca would not only retain rights to the couple's assets, but would also become the legal owner of the businesses where she was listed as a partner. Derek would lose control of a large part of his corporate empire. "Furthermore," added the judge, "considering the severity of the tax irregularities uncovered, I am forwarding a complete copy of the case file to the Department of Justice. Mr. Thompson may face criminal prosecution for tax evasion and money laundering." Derek left the courtroom escorted by officers, completely ruined and facing the prospect of prison. The man who had entered laughing at his wife for having no attorney now left the place with his head bowed, defeated. In the courthouse corridors, mother and daughter shared a long embrace. It was a hug that carried years of hurt, unspoken words, wounded pride, but also much love and mutual forgiveness. "Thank you for never giving up on me," whispered Rebecca. "I would never give up on my daughter," replied Margaret. "Even when you pushed me away, even when we fought, I kept loving you and preparing to protect you when it became necessary." In the months following the trial, Rebecca and Margaret decided to open a small law firm together. Margaret would officially return to the profession, specializing in family law, while Rebecca would study to become a legal assistant and eventually go to law school. The office operated from a simple but cozy room on Main Street in downtown Richmond. On the wall they hung a discreet plaque, "Bennett and Daughter, Women's Rights Law Firm." The first client was, ironically, Dorothy Parker, who sought help to escape a situation of workplace harassment at her new job. She had lost her job at Derek's company after the trial, but quickly found a new position at a local textile company. "Attorney Foster," said Dorothy, clearly nervous at the first consultation, "forgive me for lying in court. I was so afraid of losing my job." "You don't need to apologize, Dorothy," replied Margaret kindly. "We understand your situation perfectly. What matters is that in the end, you found the courage to tell the truth." Rebecca, now confident and reborn, used her personal experience to identify signs of manipulation that other women still couldn't see. She had become an expert at recognizing patterns of psychological abuse and financial isolation. "What amazes me the most," Rebecca commented during a break between clients, "is how I managed to be so blind for so long. The signs were all there." "You weren't blind, dear," explained Margaret. "You were manipulated by an expert. Derek knew exactly how to isolate you, how to undermine your self-confidence, how to make you completely dependent on him. It's a gradual and very calculated process." The firm began to become known in the region. Women going through similar situations sought out the two attorneys, drawn by both their professional competence and the personal story that inspired trust. One such client was Sandra Mitchell, a 45-year-old businesswoman who discovered her husband had used her signature to take out million-dollar loans in her name. "It's amazing how history repeats itself," Sandra remarked during a consultation. "He would have me sign papers saying they were just banking formalities. Now I've discovered I owe a fortune I never saw." Margaret and Rebecca worked for months on Sandra's case, unraveling a complex fraud scheme involving several companies in the region. The success of the case brought even more credibility to the firm. The relationship between mother and daughter grew stronger every day. They developed a perfect working dynamic, where Margaret handled the more technical and complex aspects of the cases, while Rebecca specialized in direct client care, using her natural empathy and personal experience. "You know what makes me most proud?" said Margaret one afternoon, watching Rebecca assist a client with extreme dedication. "Seeing how you've transformed your pain into purpose. Every woman you help is a victory, not just professionally but personally too." Rebecca smiled, feeling truly fulfilled for the first time in years. The law firm wasn't just a job, it was a life mission. The courtroom story became legend in the city. People talked about the attorney who rose from the ashes to save her daughter. Margaret, once seen only as a retired lady, was now respected as a competent professional who had never truly stopped being a lawyer. But the most impressive transformation was Rebecca's. The timid, insecure woman who had entered the courtroom that day had given way to a confident, determined person with a clear sense of purpose. "Sometimes I think that terrible day in court was actually the best day of my life," Rebecca remarked 6 months after the trial. "It was the day I got my mother back, discovered my strength, and found my true calling." The law firm grew steadily. They hired 2 law interns and a secretary, transforming the small room into a thriving professional environment. The demand was so great that Margaret needed to hire an associate attorney to help with the caseload. One of the most memorable situations they handled was the case of Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a 70-year-old lady whose son was trying to have her forcibly committed to gain control of her social security and properties. "My son says, I'm going senile," explained Mrs. Eleanor with tears in her eyes, "but I know very well what he wants. Ever since his wife came into the family, he's changed completely." Margaret identified deeply with the case. She knew how hard it was for an older woman to fight against ageist prejudices and prove her mental competence. "Mrs. Eleanor," said Margaret, taking the lady's hands, "we're going to prove that you are in full mental and emotional capacity. No one will take away your autonomy." The case was complex, involving psychological evaluations, medical assessments, and an intense legal battle. But in the end, Mrs. Eleanor not only maintained her independence, but also discovered that her son had embezzled part of her social security, being forced to return it all with interest. "You two gave me back my dignity," said Mrs. Eleanor on the day of victory. "I was starting to believe I really was going crazy." Cases like this reinforced Margaret and Rebecca's conviction that they were on the right path. They didn't just solve legal problems, they restored their clients' self-esteem and dignity. The law firm's first anniversary was celebrated with a small party in the office, with all the clients, staff, and friends. Margaret gave an emotional speech about the journey they had traveled. "1 year ago," she said, "I was just a worried mother who wanted to protect her daughter. Today we are a team helping dozens of women regain their strength and dignity. That fills me with pride." Rebecca also spoke, thanking all the women who had trusted them. "Every story we hear here teaches me something new about courage and resilience. You inspire me every day to be a better person and a more competent professional." The party was simple, but full of meaning. Gathered there were women who had been through difficult situations, but had found the strength to rebuild their lives. During the party, Dorothy approached Rebecca with an envelope in her hands. "Mrs. Rebecca," she said, a little embarrassed, "I brought something for you." Inside the envelope was a photo taken secretly on the day of the trial, showing the exact moment when Margaret entered the courtroom. The image perfectly captured the determination on the attorney's face and the relief in Rebecca's eyes. "I was in the audience and asked a reporter to take this photo," explained Dorothy. "I wanted you to have a keepsake of the day your life changed." Rebecca hugged Dorothy affectionately. The former employee had become a dear friend and one of the firm's greatest advocates in the city. With the firm's growth, Margaret and Rebecca decided to expand the services offered. They began giving lectures at schools and associations about women's rights, psychological violence, and financial independence. The first lecture was at the Highland Park Neighborhood Association, where Rebecca grew up. The room was packed with women of all ages, eager to learn about their rights. "Many of you may be living in situations of manipulation without realizing it," explained Rebecca. "I lived it for 15 years. Signs like isolation from family, total financial control, constant humiliation, these are red flags we must not ignore." A 60-year-old woman raised her hand. "But what about when we have nowhere to run, when we have no money or family?" "There is always a way out," replied Margaret. "It may not seem obvious at the moment, but there are institutions, government programs, people willing to help. The important thing is to never give up on yourselves." The lectures became so popular that they began receiving invitations from other cities in the region. The message of hope and empowerment resonated with women of all ages and social conditions. During one of these lectures in Petersburg, a young woman in her 20s approached Rebecca after the presentation. "My name is Jessica," she said nervously. "I think I'm living through exactly what you went through. My boyfriend controls everything. He's cut me off from all my friends, and now I'm starting to be afraid of him." Rebecca talked at length with Jessica, explaining the patterns of abusive behavior and offering free legal support if she decided to leave the relationship. "The hardest part," explained Rebecca, "is recognizing that you're not exaggerating, that your feelings are valid. For years I thought I was paranoid, that I was being dramatic." Jessica returned to the firm a week later, determined to end the relationship and seeking guidance on how to do it safely. With the support of Margaret and Rebecca, she managed to leave the abusive relationship and rebuild her life. Cases like Jessica's became increasingly common. The firm became a reference not only for complicated divorces, but for any situation involving psychological violence or abuse of power. The reputation of the two attorneys reached the Virginia Supreme Court, which invited them to participate in a pilot program for specialized assistance in domestic violence cases. "It's an honor to be recognized for the work we do," said Margaret when they received the invitation. "But it's also an enormous responsibility. We will be representing all the women fighting for justice and dignity." The pilot program operated within the courthouse itself, twice a week. Margaret and Rebecca handled complex cases, offering free legal consultations to women in vulnerable situations. One of the program's first clients was Linda Reynolds, a 40-year-old teacher who discovered her ex-husband had opened several credit accounts in her name after the divorce. "I didn't understand why my name was tarnished at the credit bureau," explained Linda. "I discovered he used my documents to take out loans and financing without my knowledge. Now I owe over $100,000. Linda's case was particularly complex because it involved fraud committed after the official divorce. Margaret needed to work in coordination with attorneys specialized in banking law to unravel the entire scheme. "What outrages me the most," Margaret commented during the process, "is to see how some men use the intimate knowledge they have of their ex-wives to continue causing harm even after separation. It took 6 months of intensive work, but in the end, they managed to prove that all the debts were fraudulently incurred. Linda not only had her name cleared, but also secured substantial compensation for emotional damages. "You gave me back my life," Linda said on the day of the victory. "I was starting to believe I would never be able to get credit or buy anything again." The success in cases like Linda's established Margaret and Rebecca as experts in post-divorce fraud, a type of crime that was becoming increasingly common. Parallel to the legal work, Rebecca decided to formally resume her studies. She enrolled in the law program at Tidewater State University with the goal of becoming an attorney like her mother. "I always dreamed of being a teacher," Rebecca explained to Margaret, "but I discovered I can teach in another way, by helping women know their rights and find their strength." The studies weren't easy. Rebecca needed to balance night classes with work at the firm and court appointments, but she was determined to graduate and become a fully fledged attorney. Margaret supported her in everything, often staying late at the office so Rebecca could study in peace at home. "Seeing you fight for your dreams makes me prouder than any victory in court," Margaret said. "You're proving it's never too late to start over." During her second year of college, Rebecca had the opportunity to do a supervised internship at her mother's own firm. It was a unique learning experience, where theory and practice combined naturally. One of the clients who most impacted Rebecca during the internship was Patricia Coleman, a 50-year-old woman who had discovered her husband had maintained a second family for over 10 years. "The worst part isn't even the betrayal," Patricia explained during the first consultation. "It's discovering that I financed that other family's life without knowing. He used money from our company to support his mistress and her children. Patricia's case involved complex business issues, since she and her husband were partners in a medium-sized construction company. Unraveling the money transfers required hiring a specialized forensic accountant. It's impressive how creative men can be when they want to hide betrayals," Rebecca commented to Margaret. "They create elaborate systems of lies that work for years." The lawsuit lasted almost a year, but in the end, Patricia managed not only to keep her share in the company, but also received compensation for the misappropriated funds. The ex-husband lost practically everything and also had to assume the debts he had incurred in the company's name. "You taught me that I was stronger than I imagined," Patricia said on the day of the final judgment. "During 30 years of marriage, he made me believe I was incompetent at business. Now I'm running the construction company alone and much better than before." Stories like Patricia's became inspiration for other clients. The firm turned into an informal meeting point where women shared experiences and supported each other. Margaret decided to formalize this aspect by creating a support group that met once a month at the office. The meetings were coordinated by a volunteer psychologist and covered topics such as self-esteem, emotional rebuilding, and financial planning. "We realized that the legal work is only part of the recovery process," explained Margaret during the first meeting. You also need emotional support and practical tools to rebuild your lives. The support group quickly grew, reaching over 20 regular participants. Women of different ages and situations found a safe space there to talk about their challenges and achievements. One of the most dedicated participants was Helen Parker, a 65-year-old woman who had lost all her savings in a scam perpetrated by her own son. "My son convinced me to lend him my retirement money for a fantastic business," Helen shared during a meeting. "I later found out he spent it all on drugs and gambling. I lost the house. I lost everything." Helen's case was legally complex because it involved family relationships and substance abuse issues. Margaret worked for months to find a solution that protected the mother's interests without completely destroying the son. The solution found was an agreement where the son committed to undergoing substance abuse treatment and reimbursing his mother through fixed monthly payments. Helen secured a small supplemental pension and a public housing unit through social programs. "The most important thing," Helen said months later, "wasn't even the money. It was regaining my dignity and learning that I am not to blame for my son's illness." By the third year of operation, the firm had already become a respected institution in the region. Margaret and Rebecca handled cases from the entire Tidewater and northwestern Virginia region, in addition to receiving consultations from other parts of the state. The clientele was diverse, from successful businesswomen to rural workers. All found the same level of dedication and professional competence at the firm. One of the most special clients was Mrs. Martha Williams, a 70-year-old farmer whose family was trying to take her land, claiming she was no longer capable of managing the property. "My family wants to put me in a nursing home and sell my land," explained Mrs. Martha indignantly. "They say a woman my age can no longer run a farm alone." The case involved issues of civil capacity, inheritance law, and ageism. Margaret identified deeply with the situation, remembering her own struggle to prove professional competence after 60. "Mrs. Martha," Margaret said during the first meeting, "we will prove that you are in full physical and mental capacity to manage your property. Age is not synonymous with incapacity." The process was long and emotionally draining. Mrs. Martha's family hired expensive lawyers and tried to use their economic power to intimidate the elderly woman. But Margaret and Rebecca were prepared for a prolonged legal battle. During the proceedings, it was discovered that Mrs. Martha's land was worth far more than the family had initially claimed. A mining company was interested in buying the property for a price 10 times higher than the normal market value. "Now we understand why your family was in such a hurry to put you in a home," Rebecca explained to Mrs. Martha. "They wanted to sell your land for a low price and then split the mining company's money among themselves." The discovery completely changed the course of the case. Mrs. Martha not only maintained possession of her land, but also secured a contract directly with the mining company, guaranteeing a substantial lifelong income. "You saved me from being robbed by my own family," Mrs. Martha said on the day of the victory. "I was starting to believe I was really getting senile." Mrs. Martha's case was widely covered in the local press, establishing the firm as a defender of senior citizens' rights. They began receiving similar cases from across the state. During her 4th year after graduation, Rebecca developed a specialization in Social Security law, helping women who had been harmed by changes in retirement rules or who were facing difficulties with welfare benefits. "I discovered that many women lose Social Security rights because they don't know how to prove time spent on domestic work or informal activities," explained Rebecca during a lecture on Social Security rights. One of the clients in this new area was Ruth Thompson, a 55-year-old woman who had worked as a domestic helper her entire life, but never with formal employment records. She was having trouble securing her retirement. "I worked in family homes for over 30 years, explained Ruth, "but most employers never wanted to provide formal records. Now they say I'm not entitled to anything." Rebecca worked for months collecting evidence of Ruth's work, testimonies from neighbors, old receipts, payment records, any document that proved her labor activity over the years. "Domestic work is one of the most important professions in society," argued Rebecca during the hearing at the Social Security Administration. "It cannot be devalued just because it's often performed informally." The case was won, and Ruth secured her retirement with the right to receive back payments. The success set a precedent for other similar cases, establishing Rebecca as a specialist in social security rights for domestic workers. In the 5th year of operation, Margaret made an important decision. She wanted to gradually retire from active legal practice to dedicate herself to training new lawyers specializing in women's rights. "The time has come to multiply our work," explained Margaret to Rebecca. "One person can help a few dozen women over a career. But if we train other lawyers, we can help hundreds, thousands." Margaret created a specialization course in advocacy for women's rights, offered in partnership with Tidewater State University. The course combined technical aspects of law with psychological and social issues specific to cases involving gender-based violence. The first class had 15 students, all already licensed lawyers who wanted to specialize in the field. Margaret brought her practical experience, while Rebecca, now also a law school graduate, contributed with real cases studied at the firm. "What impresses me the most," commented one of the students, "is seeing how you transformed personal pain into professional competence. This inspires us to be more than just technical lawyers." The course became highly sought after, with a waiting list for subsequent classes. Margaret had found a new calling, training the next generation of lawyers specializing in women's rights. Meanwhile, Rebecca gradually took over the complete administration of the firm. She now coordinated a team of 5 lawyers, 3 interns, and 2 secretaries. The small one-room office had transformed into a specialized legal center, occupying an entire floor. "Sometimes I look at all this and can hardly believe it," commented Rebecca during a team meeting. 5 years ago, I was a woman with no resources, humiliated in a courtroom. Today, I coordinate a team that helps hundreds of women a year. The growth brought new challenges but also new opportunities. They opened a second branch in Charlottesville, serving the mountainous region of the state. The demand for specialized women's rights services was greater than they had imagined. One of the most significant achievements was the creation of a free legal assistance program for low-income women, funded through a partnership with the Virginia Supreme Court and non-governmental organizations. "Our goal has always been to democratize access to justice," explained Margaret during the program's inauguration. "Every woman, regardless of her financial condition, has the right to competent defense." The program served over 200 women in its first year, resolving cases ranging from overdue alimony payments to complex situations of financial abuse. During the 6th year, Rebecca received an unexpected invitation. The Virginia State Bar Association wanted her to join a national commission to reform laws for the protection of women. "It's a tremendous honor," Rebecca said to Margaret, "but it's also frightening. I will be helping to create laws that will affect millions of women across the country." Margaret encouraged her to accept the challenge. "You have the practical experience that many lawmakers lack. You know firsthand the gaps in the current legislation and the real needs of the women seeking justice." The work on the commission meant frequent trips to Washington and meetings with other experts from across the country, but Rebecca was determined to contribute to improving legislation for women's protection. One of the proposals she advocated for most vehemently was the creation of a national financial protection system for women going through divorce, preventing them from being left unprotected during legal proceedings. "Many women give up fighting for their rights because they run out of financial resources during the process," argued Rebecca during one of the commission's sessions. "We need to create mechanisms that guarantee basic sustenance during the proceedings." The proposal was accepted and included in the Family Law Reform Bill. If approved by Congress, it would help millions of women in situations similar to what Rebecca had faced years before. Meanwhile, Margaret dedicated herself increasingly to teaching. She had created her own methodology for training specialized attorneys, combining technical knowledge with human sensitivity to handle cases of gender-based violence. "Traditional law teaches you to win cases," Margaret explained to her students, "but in our field, winning the case is only part of the work. We need to help our clients rebuild their lives completely." Margaret's former students began opening specialized law firms in various cities across Virginia and neighboring states. An informal network of feminist advocacy was forming, all following the principles developed in the original Richmond office. One of these former students, Jennifer Morgan, opened a firm in Alexandria and quickly became a reference in the mountain region. She maintained constant contact with Margaret, consulting on complex cases and sharing experiences. "What I learned from you goes far beyond the law," said Jennifer, during a visit to the original office. "I learned that advocacy can be a form of social activism, a way to transform society one woman at a time." In its 7th year of operation, the firm received the National Human Rights Award for its significant contribution to the protection of women's rights. The ceremony was held in Washington, with national authorities in attendance. "This award is not ours," said Margaret during the acceptance speech. "It belongs to all the courageous women who had the strength to fight for their rights, even when all seemed lost." Rebecca also spoke, recalling her own journey. 7 years ago, I was a broken, humiliated woman without hope. Today I am here representing hundreds of women who found the strength to start over. This proves we should never give up on ourselves. The award brought national recognition for the work they had developed. They began receiving invitations to speak at universities across the country and to consult on high-profile cases. One of the most notable cases during this period was that of Susan Davis, a businesswoman from New York who discovered her husband had diverted millions of dollars from the family business to overseas accounts. "My husband convinced me to sign documents saying they were for tax protection," explained Susan during the first video conference. "I discovered he was actually transferring our entire assets to countries where I have no access." The case involved international law issues and required hiring specialized attorneys in several countries. But Margaret and Rebecca coordinated the entire process, applying the same methodology they had developed for smaller cases. It took 2 years of intensive work, but they managed to recover a large portion of the diverted assets. Susan not only maintained control of the company, but also became one of the leading businesswomen in the American textile sector. "You taught me that competence knows no age or gender," said Susan after the victory. "Today, I run the company better than ever, proving that women can be excellent executives when given the opportunity." The success in high-profile cases established the firm as a national reference. They began receiving inquiries from all over the United States, often coordinating work with local attorneys who had been trained by Margaret. During the 8th year, Rebecca made an important decision. She wanted to create a non-profit foundation dedicated exclusively to cases involving women without financial resources. "We've achieved commercial success helping clients who can pay," Rebecca explained to Margaret. "Now I want to use that experience to help those who truly cannot afford to hire an attorney." The Margaret Bennett Foundation was created with the firm's own resources and donations from satisfied clients over the years. The goal was to offer completely free legal services to women in situations of extreme vulnerability. The foundation operated in its own headquarters, separate from the commercial firm, with a team dedicated exclusively to pro bono cases. In the first year, they served more than 500 women free of charge. One of the foundation's beneficiaries was Mary Elizabeth, a 40-year-old farm worker who had lost her rights to the family land after her husband's death. "My husband's brothers said a woman cannot inherit land," explained Mary Elizabeth. "They expelled me from the farm where I lived for 20 years and said I had no right to anything." The case involved issues of rural inheritance law and deeply rooted cultural prejudices. The foundation's team worked not only on the legal aspect, but also on raising awareness in the local community about the rights of rural widows. Mary Elizabeth not only recovered her share of the property, but also became a female leader in her region, helping other rural women learn their rights. "The foundation didn't just change my life," said Mary Elizabeth during a visit to the headquarters. "It changed the lives of all the women in my community. Today we know we have rights and we are not afraid to fight for them." In the 9th year of operation, Margaret decided to write a book telling the story of the firm and presenting a methodology for legal practice specialized in women's rights. Feminist Advocacy, From Personal Pain to Social Transformation, was published by Social Justice Press and quickly became an academic reference in the field. The book combined legal theory with practical cases and reflections on the role of legal advocacy in social transformation. "I wanted to document everything we've learned over these years," explained Margaret during the launch, so that other attorneys can benefit from our experience and don't have to start from scratch. The book was adopted by several universities as required reading in law courses. Margaret began receiving invitations for academic lectures across the country. Rebecca, in turn, dedicated herself to writing a practical manual for laywomen, explaining basic rights in accessible language. Woman, Know Your Rights was distributed free of charge at health centers, schools, and community associations. Many women suffer rights violations simply because they don't know they have rights, explained Rebecca during a manual distribution campaign. Knowledge is power, and we want to democratize that power. During the 10th year of operation, the firm had transformed into a true institution. They operated in 4 cities, had a team of 25 professionals, and had helped over 3,000 women throughout the decade. To celebrate, they organized a special event bringing together all their clients, Margaret's former students, staff, and supporters. The event was held at the Richmond Cultural Center with a capacity for 500 people. 10 years ago, said Rebecca during the opening speech, I was just a desperate woman who was lucky enough to have a courageous mother. Today we are a network of hundreds of women supporting each other and fighting for justice. Margaret, now 75 years old, gave an emotional speech about the journey traveled. When I entered that courtroom 10 years ago, I just wanted to protect my daughter. I never imagined that act would start a movement that would change so many women's lives. That fills me with pride and gratitude. During the event, several clients shared their stories of overcoming. Dorothy Parker, now a supervisor at a textile factory, spoke about how the support received at the firm changed her perspective on life. You taught me that I had value, that I deserved respect. That transformed not only my professional life, but also how I am as a mother and as a woman. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, now 80 years old and still living independently, thanked them for her restored dignity. You saved me from being forcibly institutionalized and taught me that age is no reason to lose autonomy. Today, I am more active and happy than many 40-year-olds. The event was a success, but also a moment of reflection on future challenges. Margaret and Rebecca knew there was still much work ahead. In the months following the event, they began planning the next phase of growth. The goal was to create a permanent training center for attorneys specializing in women's rights, with the capacity to train 100 professionals per year. Our dream is that in every judicial district in the United States, there is at least one attorney specialized and sensitized to gender issues, explained Margaret during a strategic planning meeting. The training center would be built on land donated by Richmond City Hall with funds raised through public grants and private donations. The architectural project included classrooms, a specialized library, an auditorium, and spaces for practical client services. While the training center was being planned, Rebecca dedicated herself to expanding the national network of specialized firms. She traveled across the country, identifying attorneys interested in receiving training and support to open similar firms in their cities. The idea is not to create franchises, Rebecca explained to the interested attorneys. It's to form a collaborative network where each firm maintains its independence but shares knowledge and methodologies. The first attorney to join the network was Michelle Roberts, no relation to Margaret, who opened a practice in Atlanta. Within 6 months, she had already helped 50 women from Georgia and become a regional reference. What impresses me most about your methodology, commented Michelle during a monthly network video conference, is how you managed to combine technical competence with human sensitivity. That makes all the difference in client care. Gradually, the network grew to 15 American cities. The attorneys would meet quarterly to exchange experiences, discuss complex cases, and plan joint actions. One such action was the creation of a free mobile app called SOS Women's Rights, which offered basic information on rights, guidance for emergency situations, and contacts for specialized attorneys in each region. We want any American woman to have access to basic information about her rights right in the palm of her hand, explained Rebecca during the app's launch. Within a year, the app had over 100,000 downloads and was responsible for connecting thousands of women to specialized legal help. During the 11th year, Margaret received an unexpected proposal. The Department of Justice wanted to hire her as a consultant for the reformulation of national policies for women's protection. "It's a unique opportunity to influence public policy on a national scale," said the department secretary during the proposal presentation meeting. "Your practical experience is exactly what we need to make the laws more effective." Margaret accepted the proposal, but on one condition: she would work as a volunteer without receiving payment to maintain total independence in her recommendations. The work in Washington allowed Margaret to directly influence the creation of new laws for women's protection. Her main contribution was the development of more efficient protocols for cases of economic abuse and financial abuse. "My personal and professional experience has taught me that financial violence is as destructive as physical violence," argued Margaret during a hearing in Congress. "We need specific laws to combat this type of abuse." Margaret's proposals were incorporated into the new legal framework for women's protection, approved unanimously in Congress. The law established mechanisms for emergency financial protection for women in the process of separation and more severe penalties for crimes of economic abuse. Concurrently, Rebecca assumed full coordination of the law firm and the foundation's operations. At 45, she had become one of the most respected attorneys in the United States in the field of women's rights. Her competence was recognized when she received the invitation to join the National Council on Justice as a representative of human rights specialized advocacy. "It is an enormous honor," said Rebecca upon accepting the appointment. "I will work to ensure the judiciary becomes increasingly sensitive to issues of gender and the protection of the vulnerable." On the National Council on Justice, Rebecca worked on creating training programs for judges and court staff on gender-based violence. Her practical experience helped develop more humanized protocols for the judicial care of women in situations of violence. One of the most successful initiatives was the creation of special testimony rooms in courts across the country, spaces specifically prepared to hear women victims of violence with a less intimidating environment than traditional courtrooms. During the 12th year, the training center was finally inaugurated. The Margaret Bennett Center for Feminist Legal Training had the capacity to host 100 students per class and offered courses at different levels of specialization. The inauguration ceremony was attended by national authorities, including the Secretary of Women's Affairs and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Over 1,000 people participated in the event. "This center represents a dream born from personal pain and transformed into hope for thousands of women," said Margaret during the inauguration speech. "Here we will train the attorneys who will protect the next generation of American women." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The center's first class included attorneys from all across the United States and even from other countries in Latin America. The course combined theoretical classes, practical case studies, and supervised internships at the network's law firms. One of the international students was Diana Sullivan, a Canadian attorney who wanted to implement a similar methodology in Toronto. "Your experience in the United States is inspiring similar movements throughout Latin America," said Diana during an interview. "We want to replicate this model of socially committed advocacy in our countries." The international success of the American model led to the creation of the Latin American Feminist Legal Network, coordinated from the training center in Richmond. During the 13th year, Margaret decided it was time to retire from active legal practice for good. At 77, she wanted to dedicate herself exclusively to writing and training new generations. "There comes a time when our greatest contribution is no longer handling individual cases, but multiplying our experience through other people," explained Margaret during an interview for a legal magazine. She handed over the general coordination of operations to Rebecca, retaining only teaching activities and strategic consulting. Her main focus became writing a trilogy of books on feminist advocacy. Rebecca, now 47, assumed full leadership of what had become a national movement. Under her coordination, the network grew to 50 specialized law firms across the United States. The social impact of the work developed was measurable. In 13 years, the network had assisted over 15,000 women, recovered hundreds of millions of dollars in misappropriated assets, and influenced the passage of a dozen laws protecting women. But for Margaret and Rebecca, the statistics mattered less than the individual stories of transformation. Each woman who had regained her dignity, each daughter who had reconciled with her mother, each life that had been rebuilt represented a personal victory. "Our greatest success is not the numbers," said Rebecca during an international conference on women's rights. "It's the letters we receive from women saying they found the strength to start over, that their children have a more confident mother, that their granddaughters will grow up in a slightly fairer world." One such letter came from Jessica, the young woman who had sought help during a lecture years before. Now a law school graduate, she had opened her own specialized practice in Philadelphia. "Dear Rebecca and Margaret," Jessica wrote, "you saved my life when I was 22 and trapped in an abusive relationship. Today, at 32, I am an independent attorney and have just helped my 100th client escape a similar situation. Every woman I help is a way to honor what you did for me." Letters like this arrived weekly from all over the United States. Women who had been helped directly, daughters of clients, granddaughters who grew up seeing their grandmothers fight for dignity, all wrote to thank them and tell how their lives had been impacted. During the 14th year, Rebecca was invited to give a lecture at the United Nations on legal innovations for the protection of women's rights. It was the international recognition of the American model. "The American case shows that it's possible to combine competent advocacy with social commitment," said Rebecca to an audience of legal professionals from 50 countries. "When attorneys specialize not only technically but emotionally to handle gender-based violence, the results are exponentially better." The presentation at the UN led to invitations to implement the American model in other countries. Rebecca began doing international consulting, always with the goal of adapting the methodology to the local realities of each country. The first country to implement the model was Canada, where a network of 15 attorneys was trained directly by Rebecca and Margaret. In 2 years, they had helped over 1,000 Canadian women and influenced significant changes in local legislation. "It's moving to see how our methodology adapts to different cultures while maintaining the essence of humanized service," commented Margaret after a visit to Canada. During the 15th year, Margaret turned 80 and decided to do a complete retrospective of her journey. She organized her memories into an autobiographical book titled "From Resentful Mother-in-Law to National Attorney: Memoirs of a Silent Revolution." The book became a bestseller and was adapted into a television miniseries that moved the entire country. The story of Margaret and Rebecca inspired a new generation of women to fight for their rights and a new generation of attorneys to specialize in the field. "I never imagined our personal story could have such a broad impact," said Margaret during the book launch. "This teaches me that we never know how our acts of courage can inspire other people." The miniseries reception led to an exponential increase in demand for the network's services. They needed to hire more professionals and open new units to meet the growing demand. One of the most positive consequences was the increase in the number of young women interested in studying law with a focus on human rights. Colleges reported a 300% growth in enrollment for law courses with this specialization. "Our story is inspiring the next generation," observed Rebecca with satisfaction. "In a few years, we will have thousands of specialized attorneys working across the country." During the 16th year, Margaret received the title of Dr. Honoris Causa from Georgetown University in recognition of her contribution to human rights and legal education. This title represents the academic recognition of work that was born from practical necessity, said Margaret during the conferral ceremony. "I hope it inspires other people to transform their personal experiences into contributions for society." Rebecca, in turn, was elected president of the National Association of Women's Rights Attorneys, solidifying her position as a national leader in the field. Under her leadership, the association launched an ambitious program to combat economic abuse, offering free consultation to women who suspected they were victims of financial abuse. "Economic abuse is still little known and recognized," explained Rebecca during the program launch. "Many women suffer this type of abuse without realizing it, thinking it's normal for their husband to totally control the family finances. The program had an immediate impact. In 6 months, over 5,000 women sought guidance, and about half discovered they were victims of some type of financial violence. One of the beneficiaries of the program was Karen Anderson, a 50-year-old businesswoman who discovered her husband had taken out million-dollar loans in her company's name without authorization. "I signed whatever papers he asked me to without question, trusting him completely," explained Karen during an interview. "I found out I owed $8 million in loans I never authorized." Karen's case took 2 years to resolve, but she managed to prove the fraud and had all the debts cancelled. Her ex-husband was sentenced to prison for aggravated fraud. "If it weren't for the program, I would never have known that was a crime," said Karen after the sentencing. "I thought it was just my bad luck or poor financial management." Stories like Karen's reinforced the importance of educational programs about financial abuse. The association expanded the program to all American state capitals, offering lectures, consultations, and specialized assistance. During the 17th year, the training center reached the milestone of 1,000 attorneys trained. Graduates were working in every American state and in 15 countries across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. "Every attorney trained here carries our methodology to tens, hundreds of women," said Margaret during the celebration ceremony. "The multiplier effect is extraordinary." One of the most distinguished graduates was Rachel Thompson, who implemented the American model in Jamaica. In 3 years, she built a network of 50 Jamaican attorneys and influenced significant changes in that country's legislation for the protection of women. "The American model adapted perfectly to the African reality," said Rachel during a video conference. "The essence of compassionate and technically competent service works in any culture." The international success of the model led Margaret and Rebecca to create the International Feminist Legal Foundation, headquartered in Richmond with operations in 20 countries. The foundation coordinated training programs, research on women's rights, and advocacy for legislative changes on a global scale. It was the definitive recognition that a personal story of pain had transformed into an international movement for social change. During the 18th year, Margaret turned 83, but remained active as a consultant and writer. She had published 7 books on feminist advocacy, and her works were translated into 15 languages. "Age has brought wisdom, but it hasn't diminished my passion for justice," said Margaret during an interview for Time magazine, which included her in its list of the 100 most influential people in the world. Rebecca, at 52, had become one of the most respected legal scholars in the United States. She constantly received invitations to lecture at international universities and consult with governments on policies for the protection of women. But despite their professional success, they never lost sight of the personal essence of their journey. Every month, they would meet in the original office room to discuss special cases and plan for the future. "No matter how much we've grown," said Rebecca during one of these conversations, "I can never forget that it all started with a desperate daughter and a courageous mother. That human essence must always guide our work." During the 19th year, they decided to create a museum about the history of women's rights in the United States, housed in the original office building. The museum combined their personal story with the evolution of women's rights in the country. "We want future generations to know the struggles that were fought to win rights that seem obvious today," explained Margaret during the museum's opening. The museum became a must-see for law students and human rights activists. Thousands of people visited annually to learn the history and find inspiration for their own struggles. One of the permanent exhibits showed the evolution of cases handled over the years, demonstrating how types of violence once ignored had gained legal and social recognition. "It's impressive to see how our collective consciousness has evolved," commented a visitor during a guided tour. "Things my grandmother considered normal are now recognized as crimes." During the 20th year of operation, Margaret and Rebecca organized a commemorative international congress, bringing together attorneys, academics, and activists from 50 countries. 20 years ago," said Rebecca during the opening speech, "we were just a mother and a daughter fighting for justice in a courtroom. Today, we are a global movement that has transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of women." The Congress was streamed live online and watched by over 1 million people worldwide. The lectures ranged from practical cases to theoretical reflections on the future of feminist advocacy. Margaret, now 85 years old, gave the most emotional closing speech of her career. "When I entered that courtroom 20 years ago, I only wanted to save my daughter. I never imagined that this act of maternal love would become a legacy for women all over the world. This teaches me that we should never underestimate the transformative power of courage fueled by love." At the end of the 20 years, the numbers were impressive. Over 100,000 women assisted directly, 2,000 attorneys trained, 500 laws influenced or created, presence in 50 countries. But Margaret and Rebecca knew the true legacy lay in the individual stories of transformation, in the reconciled families, in the women who had found the strength to start over. "Our greatest victory," said Rebecca during a final reflection, "is not the awards received or the international recognition. It is knowing there are thousands of women in the world today who are stronger, more aware of their rights, and more capable of fighting for dignity because of the work we have developed." Margaret smiled with the wisdom of one who had lived a full and transformative life. And to think it all started because a resentful mother-in-law couldn't bear to see her daughter humiliated. Sometimes what others call a flaw can be our greatest virtue. My maternal stubbornness became a social revolution. The two embraced, gazing out the office window at the city of Richmond, where it had all begun. Outside, young attorneys were entering the training center for another day of learning. Every day, new women arrived seeking help and hope. The legacy was secured. The pain had transformed into purpose, the purpose into a movement, the movement into social transformation. And this transformation would continue to spread, one woman at a time, one story at a time, one victory at a time. The last client of the day was being assisted by one of the young attorneys trained at the center. She was a 30-year-old woman wearing black with a lost look in a complicated family situation. Exactly as Rebecca had been 20 years before. "Don't worry," said the young attorney with the same determination Margaret had shown in that distant courtroom. "We'll take care of everything. You are not alone." The cycle continued. With every new client assisted, the story of Margaret and Rebecca was perpetuated. One mother's courage had become hope for future generations. And so the woman who was once humiliated for not having an attorney, and the mother who appeared when all seemed lost, wrote one of the most beautiful stories of social transformation in American jurisprudence, a story that proves it's never too late to start over, never too late to fight for dignity, and we should never underestimate the transformative power of maternal love combined with the determination of women who refuse to accept injustice. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story. Do you believe Rebecca and Margaret made the right choices in turning their personal pain into a life's mission? Do you know any woman who has gone through a similar situation? Share your opinion in the comments with sincere words. Your participation enriches our community and motivates us to continue bringing stories that touch the heart. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring narratives.